If you've ever wondered how your gut health impacts your brain health and your overall health, then this podcast episode is for you. Today on the podcast, joining me is Reed Davis, and he's going to give us 5 simple steps to get well and stay well. Reed Davis, a board-certified holistic health practitioner and certified nutrition therapist, is an expert in functional lab testing and holistic lifestyle medicine. He is the founder of Functional Diagnostic Nutrition and the FDN certification course with over 4,000 graduates in 50 countries. Reed has served as the health director at a wellness center in Southern California for over 10 years, with over 10,000 clients treated, and is known as one of the most experienced clinicians in his field. Reed serves on the advisory board of the American Natural Wellness Coaches Board and the American Association of Natural Wellness Coaches. Please enjoy my conversation with Reed Davis. Welcome to the Health, Habits, and Epic Living podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sherry Price. The goal of this podcast is to educate and enable empowered women to take the next step towards achieving their health, wellness, and lifestyle goals. Let's get started. Well, hello, Reed Davis. So excited to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for joining me. And as we get started, I know there's a burning question I want to ask you that we'll get to about the 5 critical health habits. But I'm fascinated by your background. I've heard you on other podcasts and really interested how you started the Functional Diagnostic Nutrition program, because I know I've hung around with several of my friends who've been through and colleagues, and just really want to get and have the audience learn about your background and how you started that program.
Hey, thanks so much for the opportunity. Love talking to you and your audience and being part of the amazing work that you're doing, Sherry. And, FDN is commonly referred to as now in 50 countries. And I've trained about 4,000 people, but it didn't start out that way. The FDN is Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. And that's the name I had to give to the first workshop I taught. Had to call it something, but I had been doing it for 10 years prior to naming it. I didn't need to name it. Just people came in to see me. I was working in a clinic and we got really popular because we were getting such great results. And so I decided, and people were pushing me towards teaching. Really, you should be teaching. And, okay, well, I'll put on a workshop and I named it Functional Diagnostic Nutrition, because it's very functional, foundational. It's not diagnostic in terms of medical diagnosis, but it's data driven by tests. So functional, diagnostic in nature, and then nutrition or nurturing, because I was a nutritionist at the time. And so that's the name I gave it. Now we're kind of stuck with it. And the people who originally took my first workshops wouldn't go away. They just kept hanging out and what else? And how'd you do this? How did, questions like you're asking. And so I created an alumni group for everyone who's ever graduated. They're eligible to belong to the membership alumni. And so we have a lot of people who are out there in the world doing functional diagnostic nutrition. And so it's a wonderful thing. If I could just jump back before that, in the 90s, I was actually in environmental law and conservation. I've always wanted to do good in the world and been sincere about having a purpose in life. And, that keeps me somewhat grounded, I think is the word, stable. You got to have a purpose, right? You got to get up in the morning and know what your mission is. You certainly do. And I know a lot of the listeners are very good achievers. So hopefully you have a great mission. Well, mine in the 90s was the environment, saving the whole planet. But then at the end of the 90s, 1999, I was getting older. I was in my second half of the 40s. And so I started paying attention to my own body and what was going on. And hey, maybe I should work in this area of people instead of just the flora and fauna of the whole planet. And that's very rewarding work, by the way. But I just changed jobs, frankly. And then I spent the next 10 years running thousands of labs on thousands of people. That was my job at the clinic. well, Reed, you're the non-licensed clinician. I went to school, I got my nutrition and fitness train, all these certificates for this and that, but I wasn't a physician. So my job was to find out what was really wrong with people. Like, Reed, you can't diagnose or treat. The doctors do that. You got to find out what's really wrong. Well, thanks a lot. It actually turned out to be a lot of, well, let me put it this way. I had a lot to learn, but I had nothing to unlearn. I wasn't indoctrinated in Western medicine or any kind of medicine. Just what's really wrong. And I was healthy and I was an athlete and I did a lot of things right up until, I'm in my 70s now, so still try to maintain. But I learned a lot. And again, after 10 years, I finally got convinced that I should put it into a workshop because it was working really well. Our clinic was exploding, couldn't handle all the people. And so I thought if I deputized others to do what I had developed in that 10 years, functional diagnostic nutrition, that's just the name it got.
As I see it, and I listen to your story, worrying or helping of the planet and the fungal and the flora. Now you've just taken that to the individual, right? With the microbiome and all the testing and what's our gut flora telling us. And there's a way that the planet can stay healthy, and there's a way that humans stay healthy. And so I would love to dive into that a little bit more. It's really looking at the ways we stay healthy. And I know you talk about 5 critical health habits. And since this is a podcast about health and habits, I thought we could go there next, is about these 5 critical health habits that provide the foundation to get well and stay well. Can you elaborate on those?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that came out of the fact that I was running a lot of laboratory work on everybody coming in the door. That was my job. And I had to give a sort of a nutritional, natural, pathic type interpretation. I couldn't diagnose diseases. And by the way, no one walking in the door wanted another diagnosis. They'd actually been told nothing was wrong with them, or they got some diagnosis, but it didn't really fit. It didn't cover everything. So I started noticing how well, these were also high achievers, women in high positions, or, with maybe their kids are gone or almost gone and they have great careers and things like that. They're coming in. The last thing they wanted was another diagnosis. They wanted to know what's really wrong with it. And what I noticed was how they would come in for their modalities and treatments. And we had chiropractic and acupuncture and massage and all the things, medical oversight, of course. But what I started asking is, well, what does your home program look like? What do you mean? I go to the gym and I try to eat right. So I really started to send people home with instructions. And it turned out to be what is now our kind of infamous DRESS program. So that's diet, individualized, rest, not just sleep, but resting, everything. Exercise, DRE is diet, rest, exercise. And then it's stress reduction and supplementation. So that's the DRESS. We call it Dress for Health Success. It's actually just a cute name I came up for the things I was telling people that if they really wanted to recover their health and stay that way, these were the habits that would be great for them to form. And I assisted in the development of that. So it's very highly individualized, Dress for Health Success, by the laboratory work. And of course, correlating with each individual person. We don't treat the paper. So that's another sort of huge difference is, there's a couple things about the Dress program that make it work so well. And it starts with the lab work and the data and what I call the healing opportunities. Like, we need to know what's wrong. Hormones, immune system, digestion, detoxification, and other things. The energy production and nervous system balance. And that, by the way, is another cute acronym, HIDDEN, the hidden stressors. So if we can identify the hidden stressors and dysfunctions, it's a whole constellation of things. Now, I'm going to make a point here in a moment about the dress. Why does dress work so well? Because we've identified multiple healing opportunities, which, oh, by the way, are having effects on each other. So a medical diagnosis of one of those data points is almost useless. You have to understand how the dots are connected, so to speak. And people have heard that before, but then the protocol doesn't fix one thing. It works on every cell, tissue, organ, and system at once. So the whole body just gets healthier and symptoms can disappear, and actual malfunctions, dysfunction, disease processes actually reverse themselves. So we, in that sense with dress or coaching up function, well, we coach down the contributors to what I call metabolic chaos. So it's never about one thing. It's your whole being. It's, people here say a lot of things about mind body, and it's much deeper, and it's very data driven, scientific, saliva testing, urine testing, stool testing, blood testing to get all those healing opportunities. Then what you're asking me about, which is really important, the Just program can really be designed for you, the individual. And it's remarkable how individual we are, isn't it, Sherry?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what I want to pull from the things that you've been saying that I've just experienced in my own health journey and own wellness journey is, as a pharmacist trained in the conventional or Western medicine way, not that there's anything wrong with it, but it does very much symptomatology and then medicine for that symptom. What I like, what you are saying, and what I've experienced in my health wellness journey in just the past 2 years of seeing a functional medicine practitioner, working with a few of them, actually, not just one, but a few of them, just so I can feel better, be better. And it is that holistic approach. It's not just one thing. It's not just this symptom and we're going to treat it with this pharmaceutical. It's really diving into the things that you say as part of your dress program, right? It's like, how are you eating? What are you eating? And how does that affect you? And I have laboratory data to show that I had no idea I had just a bit of a sensitivity to gluten. It's not a full-blown allergy. I didn't feel mental fog or bloated. But boy, when I sure eliminate it or reduce it in my diet, I feel definitely different. And I wouldn't have known that without functional medicine testing. There are some other things that came up as part of that, but looking at how I can make these small swaps in my diet. Now, I'm not saying I'm 100% gluten-free, but when I do reduce it, I do notice how I feel differently. And what type of exercise, especially as we, age, that should change based on the way our body is changing and our muscle mass that we're losing. So the exercise is key. And a number of other things that you mentioned as part of that anti-stress or a stress reduction program, because we know that we become less stress resilient as we age. And then maybe we have more stressors because we're in that sandwich generation and taking care of a lot of people, a lot of things, plus elevating in our work and our career and more responsibilities there. And so I like your approach in that you're saying it's not just one thing and it's not just one symptom. It's like really looking at that individual, getting the lab data, right? And what works for that person, what's not working for that person. And then having this holistic approach to help them manage all these things that are going to work that we know and that we can test in their bodies, and see,
That's exactly right.
Bring them back to wellness and health. And it's not a disease model, it's a health model, which I think is really a different mindset.
It is. Again, we don't treat the paper. It's the person who has produced those results. So for listeners, you want to think about it this way. The data on the paper might look high and it might look low, whatever we're measuring and things like that. But that's not the problem. And we want to change what created that test result. So you are in charge of the change. Now we can guide and advise and of course we know kind of what works. And then we can individualize it so that you will produce different test results, not from just a drug or something that, we need to raise that, we need to lower that. You see what I'm saying? So what I like to say is we can help you to live yourself out of the problems you've lived yourself into that produce those symptoms or those test results. And so when I say to people, the data isn't the problem, they say, wait, don't you teach a course in functional lab work? Yes, I'm kind of an expert in lab work. been running all the alternative stuff for 25 years, but the test report just is the results of how you've lived for the most part. Your diet, your sleep habits, your exercise, lack of it, or over exercising is very common these days. And then stress, we could do a whole 3 shows on that because there's mental, emotional, psycho-spiritual stress. There's physical stress, like my personal nemesis is injuries from sports. And then, of course, there's the chemical, environmental stressors, and some of those are the internal ecology. I love how you alluded to that sort of transition from I worked out with the environment, flora and fauna of the planet, and the air and the water and all that, and then just going to internal personal ecology and environment. Conservation is important. I lasted up until my mid-60s trying to exercise the way I did at 25 and 30. Sports. And I still ski and I can surf. And a matter of fact, I now am loving wake surfing on the back of my son's boat, and stuff. But I don't do jujitsu and kickboxing anymore because I get hurt and it's harder to recover and things, so I could roll a little bit on the mat maybe, but it's very, very vigorous beyond reasonableness.
Yeah. And what I've learned is when you take those recovery days off for an injury, which can last weeks to months, right? Your body is, losing progress on other things it can be doing. So it is
good point.
Yeah, you have to be smart about it and realize when your body is telling us, right, that, hey, things aren't working the way they were, and it's just a time for change. And I'm a big proponent of change and embracing change rather than seeing it as something that's not serving us, right? Change is calling us to serve our bodies in a different way. I thought about naming this podcast Health, Habits, and Hormones because I am a big fan of learning about hormones and all the ways that these signaling molecules go throughout our body. Yeah. But when I was talking about that with some people, they're like, well, hormones makes me feel like it's all going to be about menopause or it's just going to be sex hormones. So I'd like to talk about hormones in this more general sense in that they're just chemicals that our bodies release based on things we get from our inputs. That could be food, that could be exercise, that could be social media, that could be the news, right? Our inputs really determine when hormones get upregulated, which ones get downregulated. And in fact, we now know that signaling pathway either creates more wellness or more disease. So can you speak to more of this like endocrine system as a whole, these hormones as a whole, and how you work with the hormones of the body?
Oh, sure. And I can give some examples and keep it generalized, so we don't put anyone to sleep, I hope. Yeah, hormones are produced in organs, the endocrine glands in response to signals. And then they go out and they signal other activities in the body. And they metabolize, they can change from one hormone into another as well, which might add a layer of complexity, but keep it simple. So everyone's heard the word stress. And there's all these different forms of stress. It's actually ubiquitous. And some people are under a lot of stress, don't even know it. And stress actually doesn't even have to be there anymore. The original stressor, this was a study from the University of California, San Diego, that says, the original stressor could have disappeared 10 years ago, but the downward spirals that it produced can still be extant. In other words, they're still in effect. And so if you go way up to the top of the hormone balance picture, I talk about catabolic, cortisol, and anabolic, which is the DHEA. So these are very easy to measure in saliva, by the way. Do it all the time. It's inexpensive and easy to do at home. No doctor's visit and any of that stuff. So catabolic and anabolic are supposed to be in balance. Your body breaks down and it builds back up. It breaks down. And so there's this, again, catabolic, anabolic. Now kids, would be very anabolic, right? They just lean why? Because they're still growing and they're very anabolic. Everything's growing. So when you get to where I'm at, it's easy to get more catabolic. And if you're under stress, it's easy to get catabolic. Catabolic dominant starts breaking your body down. everything from your age to you name it, just starts to feel older and seem older and more effort and the energy and things like that, all the way to more severe dysfunction. But what I noticed, and I've been testing like this for decades, is that when you're catabolic versus anabolic, it's out of balance. The next thing to go, that's due to stress, any kind of stress, being punched in the face and getting yelled at by your boss, the body responds the same way with this imbalance. Now, from there, the sex hormones go. You start to affect your estrogen, progesterone, so your periods can go off, your bleeding could be abnormal, your fertility could be abnormal, all this stuff. So that's where the symptoms start to show up. Besides the fact that you feel older and your skin's drying out or whatever. So you've now got catabolic, anabolic imbalance. You're going to have sex hormone imbalances because they're made from the same master hormones, pregnenolone and so on, other cofactors and vitamins and things. So then what's the next thing to go? And I'll show you on paper every case of chronic downward spiraling stress-related conditions, which is what we complain about the most. The immune system is affected. So the secretory IgA in the gut will also usually be diminished. And we measure it and we see, hey, your immune system isn't what it could be. Well, you say, well, I don't get sick. Well, no, but you get a dysbiosis in the gut. So the good to bad flora in the gut is affected. You can have more bad than you need to or than you want to. Then you need that good bacteria to digest protein, for instance. So now you're not digesting everything perfectly. So now you've got catabolic, anabolic imbalances, sex hormone imbalances, and an immune system that's not doing its job perfectly. And you can get this dysbiosis, which we all know causes digestive trouble and sets you up, back to your point about ecology, sets you up for bigger, badder bugs. That's my favorite medical term, bigger, better bugs. The worse bacterial infections and overgrowth. Yeah. In fact, the parasites and the funguses and things can start to get hold. Again, the ecology is upset. That's the real problem. It's stress-related catabolic imbalance and dysbiosis. And I'll show you how the dominoes fall on paper on the labs that we run. It's such a common occurrence. Well, then from there, it just gets worse because with the inability, two things happen. One is you're not digesting food, especially protein, as well as you should. So you start to have problems with the amino acids, which turn into neurotransmitters. Of course, and so therefore you can have mood issues. You can have mental fogginess. Now you kind of know something's wrong, but again, your blood work will look normal.
Mm-hmm.
So you could be told that everything's fine, take a chill pill. Meanwhile, something's different and you're drinking more coffee in the morning, self-medicating and drinking more alcohol at night, and it's hard to quit.
Yeah.
So that's because of this subclinical dysfunctional downward spiral. The dominoes are falling and it just gets worse from there. So the next thing you know, you've got these bigger, better bugs moving in and you might get some food sensitivities. Now, food is actually causing its own issues on top of what you have. You get more sensitive to more things and you keep eating it because you don't know. And we measure zonulin on a finger stick test. It is a blood test, but you just poke your finger and squeeze the blood out and it dries up on the blotter and you mail it in. It's inexpensive, so easy for anyone to do. So now we'll start looking at hyperpermeability or, leaky gut. But leaky gut doesn't start one day when you eat something bad. It starts with this long-term progression of downward spiraling, dominoes falling. And I can show you that. That's what the paper we look at shows you. And then on top of that, stool tests would show you what is the nature of the dysbiosis and the bigger, badder bugs. You see actually pathology there with your parasites and bacteria and funguses and even viruses and things like that. So with the food sensitivity testing on top of those, what I did is go through 4 different labs we run add the food sensitivity testing, we look at 5 tests: blood, saliva, urine, and stool on every person, because we want a whole constellation. We want to see all the how the dominoes fell, how they're falling, where your body's a little stronger than the next person's. Everyone's a little bit different, but you can see this pattern of dysfunction. And then you can put the correct DRES, dress, rehealth, success in there. Again, coaching up function, return to normal function. That's what we want. And you're going to have to remove some of the stressors, whether that be the mental, emotional, physical, or chemical, the bugs and things, and the foods you're eating that are wrong for you, and things like that. So it's just that simple.
And I really appreciated how you walked us through. Where we started was with the stress, and how the stress creates this imbalance that we'll find oftentimes affects our hormones, particularly our sex hormones. But then the downstream effect of that, right, happens in the gut. And this gut dysbiosis, I don't believe many people understand how important that gut dysbiosis is, because we know that over 90% of our serotonin is made in the gut. 70% of our immune system cells are made in the gut. So if we don't have this great microbiome of our gut lining, and it is not healed, and it is in dysbiosis, all the downstream effects that causes, right? Like you said, the mood disorders, and what is most of medicine will treat with an antidepressant or an SSRI. And not that that's bad, and I'm not against pharmaceuticals. I don't think we're saying that. We're just saying that, does that really get to the root of the problem? If we correct the root of the problem and we set up the body and it's back to its homeostasis so it can do the functions it knows to do, it was designed to do, which is make serotonin, 90% of it in the gut. I used to think of, depression as like a mental disorder, right? But I think what we're highlighting here, it's not just a mental disorder, right? Of course, if we don't have enough of it produced in our gut, it's not going to go up to and cross the blood-brain barrier and go into the brain. So we shouldn't just be thinking of these things as like a mental diagnosis or a mental disorder, but really that brain-gut connection that is now well understood, and really populating the gut back to its homeostasis so that we don't have to be on the pharmaceuticals long term. And we can really manage the condition with, like you said, proper diet, proper nutrition, maybe some supplementation that's needed to get the gut back into a healthy state. I love how you connected all of those pieces.
Thank
so
you.
important.
It didn't happen overnight, but I learned, like I said, I had a lot to learn, nothing to unlearn. So I was able to observe, and just 20 plus years ago, exactly where we're at. We were just in the stress and catabolic and immune system and food sensitivities and bugs, that shouldn't be there, and leaky gut and the whole thing. And I had a lady come in who was kind of depressed. I could tell by her face. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she goes, "Oh, Reed, it's this, you've heard me tell the story probably." She had 40 pounds of extra weight. It was really frustrating her because she tried a lot of things. And I said, "Well," and she goes, "No, I'm on medication for the skin hives." She get hives, and it makes me gain weight. She gained 40 pounds in 2 years on this medication. And I wanted to say something. She, no, she's, and Reed, I was just at the doctor. She's explaining the sad look, it's staring at the ground. And I was just at the doctor a couple of days ago, and he said, when I told him how frustrated I was, he said, "Lady, you can be fat or you can have the hives."
Yeah. Oh.
And she said, "Well, that's depressing." And he said, "I'll be happy to write you a prescription for antidepressant." And so, by the way, I was walking her back to her treatment room from the front office, and just walking back, listening to her story. We finally got back in the room, and I said, "First name, why didn't you ever try to find out why you get the hives?" And her eyes lit up and her head snapped around so hard, and what do you mean? I said, "Well, maybe we could find out. No guarantees, but let's run some tests." And we ran our other tests along with it, of course. We want to know what was going on with their hormones and immune system. turns out she had some real bad food sensitivities and some other things to food she ate every day.
Hmm.
And the minute she eliminated those foods, remember, no, that's foods are part of the whole complex system. It's not just the foods, it's the ecology, and those foods are a part of it. But eliminating those foods, she was off her medication in 9 days.
Wow.
And in another week, she told me that she was now working out to a sweat and taking hot showers, which she hadn't done in 2 years, because even on the meds, hot showers and working out to perspiration gave her the hive. So, man, did it change her life and mine, because it kept me like, wow, you really can do some good with this.
Absolutely. And give patients hope, right? Not being told that's one or the other. You have
Not
to.
just hope, but results, because
Yes.
I could say a lot of things that are hopeful, but it's the results of actually doing the work. If they're willing to invest, and what better investment could you make? It's going to cost you some lab money. This is not paid for by insurance for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
If it was, doctors would be doing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. I love how, it's giving them the results and their health back. So important. So as we wrap up, I want to ask a question about, as our listeners are listening and thinking about implementing healthy habits, what are some of your top healthy habits that generally work for most people?
I think how your countenance, your constitution, how you review the world is very, very important.
Mm.
And, I was a happy kid. I was a Boy Scout. You helped the neighbor. You shovel their snow for free, rake their leaves in the fall. We did all that stuff. And then I just kind of leaned that way. So again, with the environmental work and that and art and motorcycles are my 3 favorite things. Helping the planet or people.
Yeah.
Riding my bike. And I love artwork. Right now it's all gardening. I do landscaping, amazing landscaping. I've planted thousands of plants on my property. And so those 3 things are what, keep me going. I love helping. And so on that, it's also my living. So I'm able to make a living doing something I love doing. And that's just icing on the cake, right?
Amen to that.
Yeah. So I have a purpose, as we started out with that.
Yeah.
And what good are you if you don't have one? And you'll notice people, it's actually a form of stress. It's you don't even know what's going on. Like you're all stressed out. What you don't have a purpose? Make something up. If nothing, is divinely imposed upon you, as probably what happened to me. But so I think that's the best habit, is to get up in the morning, be grateful, and to pray over your wife and kids, and then get to work, get something done early. So I generally, this is my last appointment for the day. So I start at 4 or 5 in the morning. I do a lot of work. I work hard till about noon or 1. And then I take the rest of the day to do my gardening and motorcycle riding and whatever the heck my wife wants to do and stuff like that. So it's a balance, and so my habits are, the ones we gave people were DRESS: diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, supplementation.
Mm-hmm.
If I work till 4 o'clock, I was like, something's wrong. I need to get outside. My wife will say, hey, you haven't gone outside. Get your ass out there and get on your tractor. This is my other thing, and do something. And so try to choose to be happy and have a purpose, and then eat right, go to bed on time, exercise. We have our own gym, and all my acreage is on it's on a mountainside. So I'm up and down the stairs and moving big rocks. And stress reduction, I not agnostic. I have a way of finding inner peace.
Yeah.
And then the supplements I take, because food just isn't good enough.
Mm-hmm. So I love how you demonstrated and gave us specifics about the dress and how you implemented it into your own life. And these are daily lifestyle habits. And I think that's what keeps us healthy, keeps us going. And I love that you hit on purpose. Inside of my Epic You program, I have a whole course on finding purpose because I know there are times of transition where people feel aloof or lost, or what is my purpose, or how can I identify more with it so it gets me excited and to live in abundance and have that mindset. That was beautifully said.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you, Reed, for coming on the podcast. And if my listeners want to learn more about you or anything about you, where shall we send them?
Yeah, so we actually have a URL special for our listeners today, and it's fdntraining.com/EpicYou, EPICYOU, in honor of the podcast, of course. So fdntraining.com/EpicYou.
Wonderful. Well, we'll make sure we put that link in the show notes. And thank you for joining me, Reed Davis. Such a pleasure in this, such a meaningful conversation.
My pleasure, Sherry. Great to get to know you better.
Thanks for listening to the Health Habits and Epic Living podcast. If you're ready to take the next step to improve your health, wellness, and lifestyle goals, head over to www.epicyou.com and sign up for my weekly newsletter. Again, that's EPICYOU.com. Please note that the information in this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice.